Well, cover-up, confusion, and a lack of trust. Those are the findings of a new report due out shortly into Japan's handling of its nuclear power plant crisis last year. The Fukushima site was badly damaged after last year's earthquake. The 9-magnitude quake struck on March the 11th and killed around 15,000 people. The report paints a troubling picture of the events during a meltdown catastrophe that spiraled out of control. The investigation damns the Tokyo Electric Power Company, the then Prime Minister Naoto Kan, and slams the communication between all the parties in the wake of the disaster. I'll straight now to Al Jazeera's Steve CHAO, who's on the phone for us from Fukushima. Steve, a damning report.
Well, very much so. This 400-page report offers a harsh condemnation of not only the government mishandling of the crisis, but also the mishandling of the crisis by the company that oversees the Fukushima nuclear plant known as TEPCO. Now, one of the key points out of this report is the fact that during the height of the nuclear meltdown, Japan's political leaders, we understand, were making decisions essentially in the dark. They were not being given the proper information as to the extent of the damage of the nuclear reactors at that time. That raises many troubling questions. It raises questions as to exactly whether the public was actually getting the information they needed to know what was safe and what was not, and where the radiation ultimately was traveling. We were here in the initial days last March, when this crisis was unfolding, and a lot of the public here in Fukushima was deeply concerned about exactly what was happening. They were very upset, feeling that the government was simply not giving them timely information. This report says that their concerns were in fact founded. There are a lot of allegations in this report that TEPCO was in fact covering up the extent of the damage, and ultimately it may have affected hundreds of thousands of people's lives here in this region.
And Steve, TEPCO refused to cooperate with the investigators, didn't they?
Well, that's right. We understand that the 30 investigators that were part of this committee that conducted this 6-month investigation, in fact, requested from TEPCO to have interviews with leading officials. They were repeatedly denied. But we understand that in all, they interviewed 300 people, including some TEPCO workers outside of the plant, outside of the control, if you will, of this company, and they offered a lot of insights into this. Some other concerns that come out of this is the fact that Japanese officials even considered possibly evacuating the entire populace of Tokyo simply because they did not know the scale of the nuclear meltdown. You have to recall at this point that during the height of this crisis, it was rated as a Category 7, equal to Chernobyl. But to this day, a lot of information simply is not known, specifically exactly how much radiation has been emitted by the Fukushima plant, how much has been sent into the atmosphere, how much was sent into the ocean, because it is right along the coast. There are also other troubling facts. The fact that the government ministries essentially had software to map the amount of radiation and the path of the radiation, but they simply did not share that with Japan's leaders. And it took an independent scientist weeks after this disaster to begin his own monitoring to tell the government that their 20-kilometer evacuation zone around the plant was simply not far enough and that the radiation had traveled many kilometers northwest of the Fukushima plant. So a lot of troubling questions will be raised following this release of this independent report, and many questions will be obviously directed towards the government here.
Lots of questions, like you said, Steve, and very quickly, it's highly unusual, isn't it, for such open criticism of the government in highly controlled Japan?
Well, that's right. Japan is, as you mentioned, highly controlled. It is very rare that we get this kind of insight and examination of the government handling of the situation, as well as the handling of corporations. The very fact that this independent commission was started, the very fact that they were given the access that they did, suggests that there was a great deal of public mistrust and anger directed at the government and this company, which still exists very much today. We feel it when we're on the ground here. We've been here a couple of days now. We've been here repeatedly over the past year. And the constant message that we hear from the public is simply that they mistrust the government, they mistrust TEPCO and their handling, and they believe they're still being lied to.